welcome to yet another episode of the NewSpace India podcast. We have Kris Nair here, who's the CEO of Kawa Space. Kris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks. Great to be here.
So, Kris, traditionally in space industry, you have people who have spent 20 years, 30 years building rockets or satellites, then trying to build something in space and, getting into the entrepreneurship mode. So tell us a little bit about your background and what inspired you to get into the space industry.
Right. I'm not from a traditional space technology background at all. I studied physics and then moved into mostly technology startups somewhere around 2003 onwards. In one way or other, I've been in the Indian startup ecosystem as an employee of young companies, or trying to create startups, or from the investor side. Pretty much since 2003-04, I've been in this industry. About 3 or 4 years ago, a group of people were trying to create a fund which was focusing more on the deep tech and core tech areas. That was a time I started looking more into what are the white spaces exist for a fund manager to kind of operate in. And prior to that, I was in some corporate development roles and investment roles in funds and larger multinationals. So the group then kind of slipped into this particular industry, rather than it's more of an accident, a happy accident later, than just as a natural progression from a space scientist or a space enthusiast to kind of then slowly creating their own company. Worked on a bunch of great early stage companies and part of a group which was kind of building a new space company somewhere about three and a half years ago. Later, the group kind of pursued certain people from that group pursued the manufacturing route. I thought at that particular point in time, rather than taking the venture route, create a company which is basically kind of mixing together all. So we took a more of a platform route. So Kawa Space, right now it's again it's about 9 months old. We mostly operate in critical infrastructure for corporations to kind of deploy space missions, and going well.
So when you stepped in, almost as an outsider into the space industry, what were the gaps you thought were very visible, and what were the things that you found as very bizarre?
Well, I was too stupid to kind of even realize there were any gaps, right? To be honest, we all were, whether it's in space or non-space, we are trying to build great companies. And the team I have with me right now, our primary ambition is to create a company which is kind of transcends the usual scene. And we happen to be in the space industry. And if you're taking the system route, or the spacecraft route, or a launch vehicle route, of course you have to kind of rub shoulders with the bureaucracy, which is usually not a pleasant experience for the non-patient ones, which is most of the entrepreneurs are. But the smarter ones are kind of figuring it out. Most of our contemporaries in the NewSpace ecosystem here, making massive progress, whether it's even though it's in a highly regulated industry, they're making massive progresses, and we're getting inspired with almost on a daily basis, and trying to catch up. From an outsider perspective, like I said, we were extremely lucky to kind of get a lot of support from the industry, some from the government side, mostly from the fellow entrepreneurs and ecosystem enablers at the so far so good.
So what does Kawa Space want to do, and what is your kind of mission ahead?
Right. So as an outsider, when I looked into this space, and one thing we kind of observed was that the entire satellite industry, satellite system industry at least, design in a way that so that they can actually sell more satellites. So they kind of flip the narrative all the time, saying that you need more satellites. Then we said, okay, that is one way to look at it. then before doing much, we started talking to people we know from the industry, which is mostly the customer side of the site, whether it's financial services or equivalent. I said, what exactly you want? They said, I definitely need an extra layer of information which is coming from space so that I can actually mix it with my current user set of data and make better business strategies or outcomes, whether it's micro or macro. So building on to whatever got feedback we got from the larger customers, the anchor customers we have, we took a route of designing and operating critical infrastructure and exposing that particular infrastructure. This can be imaging satellites, this can be communication constellations, and exposing that through an API so that our customers can actually do near real-time missions to capture information they would like to capture, and the software platform kind of takes care of it, put it as an API so that our customers can actually pull and push data in certain ways. That's a larger idea. We strongly believe that from a thesis point of view, the solution to space industry data going to real corporations, it's not about satellite ownership. The future is probably everybody kind of sharing this particular information, cross connection between, and creating better experiences and interfaces for them to kind of access this particular data pretty much near real time.
So when you talk to all these people, were they not aware that there was, for example, access to ISRO data where perhaps they would have used it in such a way, or were there a lot of kind of capacity building that you had to do, or kind of bring them up to speed on what is available that they could use, or how was the whole process of discovering the customer requirements? So.
Well, starting something in say whether it's in, this year or last year, a lot of the entrepreneurs who already worked on it, whether it's in space data at least, they have kind of trained the market well, and they've been supplying to most of the customers, whether it's our customers are kind of becoming the Fortune 50 of the world, and somehow their data scientist teams are already using some sort of it, right? Whether it's the open data, or they're already procuring data or insights from smaller companies or startups. So from a space-based data for your business, it's not a hard sell, and I think it's more about can you make the access to that extremely simple and programmable? That's a phase we just need to kind of catch on, rather than it's not a hard sell is a short answer.
So from what I understand, you're more looking at being a service provider, essentially where the people who are using your service do not need to care about anything that you operate as infrastructure.
Correct.
Just get the insights at the end.
Yeah.
So in establishing all of this, do you see an ecosystem in India which can support all your hardware development, all the development needed for the satellite, or are you seeing that you need to rely heavily on foreign companies to build up everything locally?
I think it is going to be a mix. So for a company like ours, or at our stage, most of them would like to kind of own and operate some sort of sensors in the low Earth orbit or equivalent. For that, it is a fairly heavy investment, both from a capital investment point of view as well as the ongoing management and insurance aspect of things. I'm fairly certain the Indian companies will emerge out and become players in that, but at this moment, looking at our current supplier list or the shortlist point of view, I would say about 20% is Indian companies and rest are all pretty much Europe. But in the quarters to come, probably we'll see more and more Indian suppliers coming to our vendor list.
So essentially, the suite of sensors that you want to have in your satellites are mostly optical cameras and
correct
things like that. So, are you looking at a range which is far beyond high resolution, or below 1 meter, or will you be looking at something above that, where you're generating more in terms of spectral data?
Right. I think so there's a little bit of confusion, at least in our heads, that for an Indian company, is it okay to kind of operate in certain resolution? For our immediate customers, I think with a bunch of partner satellites we have, we are kind of offering somewhat in the same range. But then slowly most of our customers are global companies, and it doesn't matter whether the larger growth for a company like Kawa is to kind of go and set up their centers in most of the financial capitals in the world. So depending on the regulatory situation in each country, we will increase our optical resolution in a way that we can serve our customers better.
A couple of years back, I was in China traveling, and I met a bunch of people from a Swiss, trading group, and one of the largest traders in the world. And the group had actually set up a geospatial lab inside the equity trading thing, and essentially they were a bunch of financial analysts working next to geospatial analysts and creating the kind of insights that they would need to make decisions.
Yes.
And giving me bizarre examples. For example, they were saying, look, we want to trade Disney stocks, how Disney stocks would perform based on their investment in China, because Disney had made a very big play in China, and they did not know what will be the footfall and when will be the returns and everything else. So they were telling me how, for example, they use satellite data to measure lines of people, match that with the prices of the tickets, and then make a projection of when will be the P&L balancing out.
It's hard to be an intern in these financial companies.
So do you see such deep integration of knowledge about data and forecasting into, let's say, the Indian financial markets?
Yes, we are. There's one example, I think, at least at this moment we can give, is that one of the similar financial and risk management companies, they are using some sort of, we're co-creating a solution with them on identifying the emission from certain manufacturing hubs, and zeroing on certain companies they own shares in, and understanding what kind of output from an industrial point of view they can do, so that I can actually make a macro or bet whether it's to kind of hold that particular share or short it, which is kind of similar to understanding maybe the people walking into certain recreational centers and counting the people and multiplying it with ticket sales. There are I think when you give a roughly raw but somewhat programmable and a canvas to some of the brightest people in these industries, they will pick this data, mix it with a bunch of other things, and probably create incredible ways to look at that particular situation. For a company like ours, or whether it's Kawa or anybody operating in this particular area, the best thing to do is that make these things so easy to consume, so that your use cases, you're not deciding the use cases, your end user is basically playing with it and creating solutions which even if you never thought of.
So clearly your approach is mostly B2B at the moment.
Yes.
Of course, so I was talking to some of the guys in the industry, and how, for example, the NGA in the US, the Geospatial Agency, is funding a lot of them to generate insights. One of the friends of mine was telling me, basically companies made a case where software would replace geospatial analysts, military analysts who were looking at stuff by eyes and using experience to detect what was going on. And they made a case that they would need something like 700,000 analysts every year for the kind of insights that they're generating, because they're imaging the Earth every day.
Interesting,
Right? So in India's case, for example, it's still the case where we in India have defense people who are geospatial analysts, who are just using satellite imagery, using their expertise by eyes and by patterns to mark and recognize things which are interesting. So will you think a company like you, if you are successful in showcasing that there's B2B consumption, that will open up the gateway to the military space as well?
Sure, we really hope so, and not just us. There are, like I said, our industry colleagues are working on. We are taking a certain approach, and they are taking some other approach, both in the the upstream and the downstream areas. Um, the good thing about interacting with extremely complex organizations and the analyst group in financial services or in risk management or strategic risk management in certain cases is that the system, at least something like what we call Kawa Cloud, gets better the more people use it. And when we talk about the millions and millions of API calls which is happening for certain specific function, it's a two-way thing. Our systems get better, they get a better result, and slowly in the quarters to come, the system will be strong enough for a military use case or similar. They can actually use it.
Let's wait for this thing to. Yeah. So, yeah, just continue. Yes.
Yeah. So, of course, young companies like ours, we need to prove that we can handle massive amount of data, and extremely regulated industries like financial services and equivalent probably post after say a couple of dozen customers, everybody is kind of comfortable that okay, these guys are managing probably billions of data points a day, and pretty much covering everything. Then a smaller military use case of spotting or pattern recognition, it's fairly easy for any young start.
So was it easy to raise money for your venture, and how easy is it to not just raise money to just establish the concept or proof of concept, but really to scale such an idea where it really becomes functional at an enterprise level in India?
Right. It was. We were in a lucky situation that previous experience in building or being part of growing companies kind of helped our case, in a sense that our early investors had some sort of faith in the team and the team we created, and the path we want to take. Right. The clear communication with them was that software is kind of it in the world. Space is next, and what are the ways to build that particular thesis ground up, and what kind of talent you require for that, and what kind of milestones. So once you communicate that with the institutional investors, both institutional investors as well as the angel investors who is in a cap table right now, and another thing helped was when we kind of started, we signed up about 6 or 7 customers. So it was not initially. We strongly believe a space tech development and space business development both are kind of a different thing. We are adding in more and more customers to the list, and closely listening to them what they really want, then kind of building the software stack around with it. That kind of helped. We raised a reasonable amount of money to kind of take us to at least a couple of milestones, and both institutional investors as well as private investors, we're happy to be part of that particular group, and some of them are exceptionally good entrepreneurs. I think actually all of my investors are entrepreneurs they're operating pretty influential technology startups. So that way there's a running joke that everybody there is running thing. It's just that particular software WhatsApp group is has more from a valuation point of view than anyone else. So that way it kind of helped, and thankfully most of the investors, like I said, were are technology entrepreneurs, so their risk ability is slightly higher, and so it was the right thing at the right time with the right set of people, and thankfully we had anchor customers signed up.
So I guess you would need a lot of people who are working on cloud and data analytics. Yes. And everything else. So do you think there's enough talent within India for who's ready to exploit all of that, or you think the talent is still not there?
Well, we are we're in Bombay, which is kind of an unusual city for an Indian space startup to operate, right? Like, most of the space companies prefer Bangalore or Hyderabad. And Bombay also has a bunch of problem because it's extremely expensive to kind of operate. And but we, in the last like 3 quarters, we kind of realized that more and more, like, the way we are growing, most of the software talent is kind of a remote operators than, like, just like, okay, come to Bombay office every day and fix it. Slowly our space systems team is kind of growing in the EU area than in Bangalore. Our forward deployed engineers, which is basically the sales architects per se, they are in Singapore, London, and New York. So it's going to be a distributed team. If that is the case, more and more, like, so the global talent can actually join the vision of Kawa. Then it was like, okay, Bombay, right? We do have a lot of we're hiring a lot of software talent in India. About 40% of them kind of operate from our offices, but pretty much, half of our talent is remote.
But the skill set itself, you believe that?
Yeah. So, like I said, we are a fairly young company. Like, we are growing fast, but at the same time, like, we are just 20. So I'm hoping that more and more people will pick this as industry to kind of work on when it comes to solving hard problems. I'm sure the talent is available.
So, given that you are based in Bombay and basically the initial set of customers seem to be around India, for example, does it limit the geography of operation to India, or because a satellite, of course, is going around all over the world,
right?
And you can collect information
from everywhere.
There's only 2 or 3 times that a satellite will fly over India in that sense, right? So you have the rest of the orbits, are you looking at diversifying immediately because every asset in space you can generate more information about more geographies?
Yes. So from a organizational standpoint, we are doubling down on 2 sets of customers actually. One is definitely financial services and associated industries, which is probably risk management, insurance, and a bunch of others. The way we deliver that particular solution is kind of unique. So that way, like, we can grow pretty fast in those industries. We have about 10% of it, like, which is kind of a government services. But the first set, of course, the anchor customers, if you look at it, like, we have about like 12 anchor customers, out of which 4 of them are Indian, the rest all are North America, and probably, mostly North America. So it's a natural way to kind of, like, expand into other geographies and look at their problems also, and whether space can actually solve their problems. So in the months to come, like, we will grow into more and more geographies and thinking about how to provide solutions for them.
So the first mission is always critical because you have to kind of establish all the basics and not just the basics of the technology, but the basics of operations and how that goes into feeding the customer with the result.
Correct.
So what is the kind of timeline you're looking at for your first mission possibly, and also what is the scale you think you will be operating when you're fully established with the delivery to the customer, fully operational?
Right. So I think, like, we are kind of done with a bunch of testing. I think end of this year, calendar year, we will have our first set of systems going, which we are partnering with a bunch of people, I think, mostly in the Europe. The second set, the entire timeline for our team, I think, is about 2 years from pretty much March last. So in about 2 years, we will complete the fair amount of constellation and slowly expand our services into other areas. Our cloud systems, I think it's already done, at least from a first version point of view. We are deploying that with our customers. Some of them started, but we are scaling that particular part also. Space systems fully operational, 2 years.
So one of the main aspects of all of this is also, local policy, and we have a lot of discussion about policy as well
Right.
in many places. Um, are you worried that there's something not there, or you just want to be free thinking, okay, if there is nothing stated as that something is not allowed or something is because there's nothing clear.
Right.
There's no black dots on a white paper that say something is allowed or something is not allowed, because
Correct.
we are in that ambiguity today.
Yep.
Right? So what is your sense of having to deliver these solutions, or do you think that traditionally movers will move and then people who regulate then step in to regulate?
Possible. I think as entrepreneurs, our responsibility is to build a team which can actually go beyond the usual. And most times there's a running joke anyways that space startup capital of India is Netherlands. The same way the startup capital of India is Singapore. So eventually your responsibility is to the idea, the vision, your team and your customers, right? If a certain geography is not ideal to kind of build the things, build the technologies, build the team you would like to build, then you move to a geography which supports such things. I don't think entrepreneurs usually wait for certain departments to say or not say certain things. They usually problem solvers. So I'm fairly certain most of our industry colleagues are already thinking about or already moved to friendlier geographies with clear-cut policies and soaps for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, I mean, especially in a business like yours, I think it doesn't, it's not that difficult because you're not essentially building a rocket or something where you have
Sure.
to launch out of the same base.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, sure.
So what does the full system of Kawa Space, if it is established, look like? I mean, how many satellites are you talking about? Or
Right. So we are talking about a full constellation of imaging satellites, which would be whatever the payload, which kind of helps both risk management, both agriculture and financial services. That means that kind of gives about kind of payloads you want to operate in. We will make sure that the information flow from each country, each geography we operate in, it's kind of near real time. That kind of gives it our constellations into multi-dozen ways so that you can actually capture. We operate in low Earth orbit only. The second step of that is to build efficiencies both for our own satellites as well as to the rest of the imaging industry. We probably will do some sort of computing solutions around that from a cloud point of view. And in 3.5 years time, the idea is basically to kind of own and operate pretty much you can do anything kind of constellation and expose it through an API and give it to pretty much everyone possible. Right now, it may cost a lot of money to kind of operate these things, but we kind of charge a fairly simple user fee per user per month. In the future, we try to kind of bring it that particular down into maybe $100, I don't know, at that level, and give this particular data set to larger, more team members who can actually get data from here. Right now it's mostly enterprise customers, but in the years to come we would like to kind of give it to pretty much everyone.
So what do you prefer in terms of launching? Do you care only about prices, or you would want to prefer using an Indian launch vehicle, or do you have any preferences there?
I think both me or my team or our insurance companies pretty much prefer anybody reliable, right? And the risk management companies have certain favorite launch vehicles, but as a satellite sensor, satellite-based company, or satellite-enabled company, we really don't care about the specific. I don't have anything for or against PSLV, for or against SpaceX. So pretty much anyone who is giving a reliable launch at a right cost, I'm sure we all will use it.
Have you talked to many of the vendors who serve ISRO, and have you seen any either intention or even capability that you can leverage from them?
I try to reach out to a bunch of suppliers. Some of them are really nice, but unfortunately, at this moment, for a company like ours, at least in the phase 1, we will not be able to include many of them. But some of the startups we are trying to collaborate on certain projects. Yes, but the ISRO supply base, probably I'm not the right guy to comment on it. I'm not the right guy to kind of measure that as well. But in our phase 1, very little, at least. Startups, yes, but the traditional ones, no.
Yeah. So did you happen to do a benchmarking exercise as to how deep the data integration is in different markets in India against other countries like UK or US, where the integration of data and its insights into several sectors
and the
is
regulatory point
kind
of view?
Very deep.
Regulatory point of view, or from the data science
from
point of
the
view?
completely business point of view.
Yeah, so we are constantly learning that, and both our early customers are kind of pretty much opening that particular data to us, saying that okay, this is how we are kind of interacting with it, but I need this specific solution around it. So that way, it's kind of a co-creation model, and so like I said, most of the customers are pretty much India and North America at this moment. So we are starting our learning there and slowly moving into the rest of the places. But I don't know whether I answered your question properly or not.
No, the whole idea is, for example, let's take an example of, let's say, creditworthiness of farmers, for example.
Right.
If you, let's say, go to a place like Australia,
right,
because the farms are all aggregated and the farmlands are quite big, Australia is one of the most advanced countries in terms of adoption of geospatial technologies and precision farming and things like that. Although they don't have a very well-established space program, they have a very, very well-established downstream integration of space into markets like agriculture and others.
Yeah.
So in India, it's almost the opposite, because the size of the land, for example, is so small. Precision agriculture is so difficult to get into play, and then also data becomes a very big problem, because if you don't have large pieces of area, then the insights that you can generate also kind of get limited. So there's all these mechanics that go into end markets that are very different from a place like Australia against a place like India, and there are bottlenecks to all of that. Right?
Yeah. So got it. Now, true. Like a small farmer in India, small hoarding in India is probably like 8 acres versus 100 acres somewhere else. The loan amounts or a credit check amounts they're taking on top of that particular farm is also probably 15,000 euros, no more than that. You need a different set of benchmarks to kind of analyze that. The banking team is already doing that. It's very interesting. A couple of the financial service institutions we're working with, they're using some of the systems we developed, mixing it with their current risk management systems, and pretty much creating a new way of looking at it. I think that system will go live in maybe next month. I'm sure the rest of the people are also pretty much doing a similar thing. That's one area most of the banking teams and the risk teams are excited about. We are starting that thing in India. I'm hoping that we will scale it into other countries also.
So the immediate geographies, you mentioned, for example, US or more Western countries.
Yeah.
Have you done any discovery in, let's say, Southeast Asia or Africa, or do you see yourself, making a play there?
Right. Southeast Asia. I think the idea is that without much of sales per se, companies can actually sign up and use it. The data, we will slowly make sure that they pretty much every part of Earth is somewhat covered, and ready to consume from a programming point of view. When there are more customers, we will probably create a local office, but otherwise it's pretty much ready to consume from anywhere in the world anytime now.
Yeah, there is also an integration of things like communication with image data, for example.
Yeah.
the simplest example is maybe IoT sensors
Yeah.
with image data,
Yeah.
for example, right? So I've been meeting a couple of teams here in India who are very interested in deploying IoT networks,
Yeah.
which can add to precision farming and other things. So do you see this maturing over time? Because of course, the more sensors and the more streams of information that you get, the better insights that you can generate, and the quality of the insights become better.
Correct. I've met a group of teams kind of working on this. We are not doing that. We are just playing in the image part of things. But there are a lot of teams around the world primarily going after the machine-to-machine communication or the industrial internet way of looking at it. I'm sure it's a large market, right? Like, we need to kind of pretty much connect every system on Earth so that one day, like, the robot overlords can take over. But yeah, is a bull or bear question? Probably, like, I'll say okay.
So ISRO has whole fleet of remote sensing satellites is now constructing
Sure.
to do high resolution, hyperspectral,
Yep.
all these things. So do you see yourself, making use of them by trying to access it, or do you think this is something that you may not be really interested in?
Sure. We are always ready to kind of collaborate with any sensor provider who is pretty much like, creating a new set of data. When that happens, like, of course, we are more than happy to collaborate with everyone.
So where do you see the Indian startup ecosystem? Because, when 5 years ago, there were hardly less than 5 of them
Yeah.
operating. And today, yesterday somebody said there's 40 plus
Yeah.
operating today. So let's say, in 5 years down the line, let's say, do you think this will be more than 100?
Sure. I think from a core technology point of view, like, the work is done by the first movers in space from India. Like, they have done great when it comes to inspiring people like me and people like others to kind of like think about this as an opportunity. Yeah, this is going to be the next wave. I strongly believe. Probably like more and more people will start from the application side of things, but then slowly build it into the system side of things. But I'm pretty much long on this industry. I'm sure more and more founders will see gaps in this thing and build companies around it.
So we've seen launch vehicle companies, we've seen propulsion companies,
Yep.
we've seen some downstream big data analytics companies.
Yep.
All kinds of different companies coming up. What kind of companies would you think are missing in the ecosystem today, and which you would be very happy to see up and coming in the next couple of years?
I think our industry colleagues are pretty much covering every spot possible from a launch point of view, and the core systems, communication protocols, ground segment. Also downstream, there are more and more technology teams are building solutions around it. There are a bunch of things we are doing, making more and more developers come on to it and creating solutions. I would like to see more and more, whatever industry, whatever sub industry our colleagues pick. I really want them to really go out and create important companies in that industry, and work with everyone from the industry so that we all can collectively learn from each other and grow.
So my last question to you would be, what would you think would be the size of Indian space economy in terms of the value of it, and let's say the number of jobs in the next 5 years?
Right, it's a difficult question to answer because I am not sure the real market right now. There are a lot of numbers suggested by a lot of research institutions. Let's assume that with the first step towards building companies, most of us are here. Let's consider that like X. In about 5 to 10 years time, ideally our responsibility to grow this particular market into 100x, right? I think some of will be pretty much, even if give a massive discount to the whole efforts, I would like to see the industry to grow at least into 100x. When that happens, right now probably the private space industry collectively employ about directly or indirectly maybe 5 lakhs, maybe 300,000 to 500,000 people. And when they build more and more efficient companies, I would like to see this particular number to kind of go 10x, right? I'll be very happy if that happens, or when that happens. The timeline, I don't know, maybe it's 3 years if the policies are correct. Otherwise 10 years if the policies are wrong right now, because then every entrepreneur needs to go out, create a intellectual property elsewhere, then consider India as a outsource center than a technology creating center.
Thank you so much for your insights and for your time. I appreciate it for taking your time off during the event. And
thanks a lot, man. No problem.
And good luck to your team.
Thanks a lot.
I hope that to catch up with you at a future event and possibly reflect on this episode and
let's do that.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for staying until the end. If you have any comments or suggestions, please write to curator@newspaceindia.com. Please consider sharing this episode with any friends or family who may be interested in learning about India's space activities. If you would like to stay in touch with the NewSpace India community, please use the link in the description to join the NewSpace India Telegram group. Feel free to also suggest guests for any future episodes. A new episode of the NewSpace India podcast is released every other Friday. Do subscribe to the podcast using Apple, Google, or any other podcasting platforms you may use. Until the next episode, thank you.